I'd like to make just a few brief prefatory remarks. You all have the biographical cheat sheets for our authors. All of these are authors who have been published in the Antioch Review over a number of years. Bruce J. Friedman was going to be here, but he recently had surgery, and like everyone who has surgery, they get sick in the hospital. The usual account. So Bruce is unable to be here and sends his regrets. I think when I suggested this topic to Noreen about a year ago, it was prompted by a letter that E.M. Forrester wrote to Edith Wharton, and he wrote from London. And in the letter, he gave her some advice, and the advice was that she ought to do New York. Namely, he'd already done London, and he didn't want her probably trespassing particularly. He would hand off, as it were, New York to her, which of course, as you know, she did quite wonderfully. A cautionary tale is something Poe wrote about New York, and he said, it does not allow itself to be read, and that really means that it is too multifaceted, it is too large, it is too dramatic, it changes radically from day to day, so that when one talks about the literary capital of America, one has to now include Brooklyn, where half of the literary culture in America now exists. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I have a photograph which I will sell, I think, to page 6, if at all possible. It's a photograph of 40 altar boys. I was raised in a Catholic family, and there are 40 of us in mufti, dressed up in the usual ceremonial garb of what altar boys wore, and I was in the first row. In the back last row was Pete Hamill. You don't normally see him dressed up these days in that fashion, nor do I. And both of us left Brooklyn for larger spaces. And in my case, the larger space really was Manhattan, which I thought it was wonderful. And that when a decision was made by my wife and I to purchase an apartment in the city, this was 20 years ago, I had only 2 requirements. One was that it would not be in Brooklyn. I had left there for perfectly good reasons, and I had no reason to return. And I wanted a view. And we got a view. And it's a view of the Empire State Building. So that there are many, many reasons why people leave places, and sometimes it's just to go across the river. I'll end by, I once worked at the New York Historical Society. As I came out of the building, there were 2 maintenance workers talking, and I overheard the conversation, and one of them said, "Do you ever read the New York Times?" And the worker said, "Oh no, that's for people in Manhattan." And we have a representative of the New York Times is here, and I'm sure she understands the dynamic of all of that. What I'd like to do is simply pose a rather simple question for our panelists. And the question is, could you talk a little bit about your own personal history or aesthetic concerns which led you to write about New York? Namely, there are various reasons why people write about a subject and what motivates them. And it may be highly personal, but it may be that they have an aesthetic interest, and that aesthetic interest drives them in one direction or another. And Alethea Black will lead off and make some comments. Alethea.
You know, I've known Bob for a few years now, and I never knew that he was an altar boy until tonight. But I wanted to thank all of you so much for coming, and to thank Bob for having me. He was actually the first editor to ever say yes to a story of mine. And that story is now the first in a collection that I have coming out in June called I Knew You'd Be Lovely. So if you buy the book, and I wish you would, and you read the first story and you enjoy it, you should think warm thoughts about Bob. But New York has shaped my writing chiefly in 2 ways. The first would be as a source of material. And there's a story in the collection called Mollusk Makes a Comeback that concerns an underemployed 20-something who's trying to find her way in the world, specifically in the world of New York. And at one point, her phone is disconnected and her car is impounded and she's attacked by a pigeon all in the same day, because that's the kind of thing that can happen to you in New York. And there's another story about a woman who's so committed to the idea of attending a particular party that even though she's ill and has no voice, has laryngitis, she goes to the party with wearing a clipboard around her neck. And really, where are you going to set a story like that if not in New York? And in the first story that I mentioned, there are other similar episodes. She sort of is sampling the work experience of the world. And she works for a Midtown office at one point that's so besieged by phone calls that she has to say, "Thanks for holding, can I help you?" so many times in a row that she once says, "Thanks for helping, can I hold you?" And she goes on to work at the Barnes & Noble at Lincoln Center and is totaling a customer's stack of Cliff Notes and says to him gently, "I know these are convenient, I've used them myself plenty of times, but you might go back and read the actual books at some point, maybe later or in addition or something." And the man looks at her and pays with a $100 bill and says, "Yes, I could do that, but then again, look where that got you." So this is all by way of saying that New York, if you play it right, can do your writing for you. It also put me in touch with the twin poles of hunger and possibility. Hunger in the sense that when I lived here, and I've since moved up to Dutchess County, I live in a town about an hour and a half north of here, but when I lived here, it seemed to me that everyone I knew had come in search of a dream. And I sometimes joke with my friends even that New York is where you come when you're looking for your dream, and Pauling is where you go when you found it. But I worked for a long while when I lived here as a proofreader for a magazine, and everyone in the copy desk for this magazine had some other secret life. There was an Icelandic poet, and a children's book illustrator, and a folk guitarist, and a couple of novelists. And there was something about being connected to that community of keepers of the dream, of people who had this shared yearning that was very nurturing to me as an artist. And the other pole that perhaps is a necessary corollary to that, to the pole of hunger, was that of possibility, in the sense that anything can happen here. And there's a certain elasticity of experience and a vague sense that the normal rules don't apply. On any given day, I could have shown up to work and said, "David Letterman just said hello to me." I was leaving Starbucks and he was headed east and I was headed west, and he said hello, and I said, "Hi, Mr. Letterman." And invariably the person I was speaking to would have said, "That's nice, can I have my coffee?" And I have to say that sense of possibility is one that I've retained, and even though I've moved, I still sort of have that. When I come back to New York, there's this moment when I'm crossing over the Henry Hudson Bridge where I sort of start to feel like, oh, anything can happen. Unless there's traffic on the West Side Highway, in which case I think, no, nothing can happen here. Nothing has ever happened here, and nothing will ever happen here. But I'll just close by saying that when I did move, and I like where I live now, it's almost a caricature of where you would imagine a writer living. It's a sort of a cottage with stone front and on a lake, and there's a wood-burning stove. But when I did leave New York, I was worried about the loss of culture. And the first summer that I lived in Pauling, I was driving around the town center, and there's one of those community announcement boards that was mentioning our local town day coming up, and it said that Yo-Yo Ma would be featured. And I said, what were you worried about? Yo-Yo Ma is playing at your local town day, until I realized that a tree was obscuring part of the sign, and it actually said the Yo-Yo Man. Which is different.